All right. Hey, everyone. To start off, thanks for everyone for coming. Love seeing the crowd here every time. My name's Sina. I work at Chainlink Labs. I work on market development. With us today, we have Avalanche. We're really excited. Ava Labs. And we have Jay. So, Jay, thanks so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. I guess to start off, maybe you can give us a little bit about your background, how you got to know Ava Labs, and yeah, maybe just a little primer for everyone to get started.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. So my name is Jay Kurahashi-Sofue. I'm the VP of Marketing at Ava Labs. Ava Labs is the company that's currently building Avalanche, the Layer 1 blockchain. In terms of my background, I kind of stumbled into Bitcoin, just got a long story, not really worth getting into, but early days, 2011, nothing was happening. It was just moving money around, trying to really figure out what we could really do with this technology. Not until about 2014, 2015, did I really hit my own personal aha moment, which was with Vitalik really starting to talk about smart contracts and how applications can be powered by this revolutionary technology called blockchain. And the thing that really resonated with me is I'm a technologist at heart, love using apps, try and explore as much as possible. So she's on my team as well. We were talking about this in the car, and huge gamer, huge, I guess, like music fan. So all these different verticals touch technology in one way or another. And to remove the intermediaries as a value proposition made so much sense to me. And so once that happened, actually was at an ad agency in Midtown called Ogilvy. You guys might know of it. Started an agency there. And then right after, if you've actually worked in the agency world, it's not the best. So was really trying to figure out what my next move was. Realized being an operator in the space was probably how I could get my hands dirty and really get in the front lines, kind of like the space that's here. I think some of you guys probably are here really trying to understand what's next, what's the opportunity for me, what's the opportunity for everybody else, and that's where I was, I think, in the 2016-17 era. Luckily for me, when I jumped and joined the first company I worked at in the crypto space, it was called Fluidity. We had a product called AirSwap. It was a decentralized exchange. I think like the third day I joined, it was the bear market for the ICO time. So my timing was impeccable, and I was there for about 2 years, and we did amazing things. I don't think the world cared too much about them, though, but learned a ton. And then shortly after, COVID happened, and that was also another impeccable timing, and my boss, John Wu, he reached out, and we didn't know each other, but that's how I got introduced to Ava Labs and really understood what the vision was, learned a lot about the Avalanche blockchain, and I think the biggest jump for me, it's kind of like, the best analogy is, imagine if you're working at Apple and working on the iOS ecosystem, and someone's saying, hey, there's a new technology called Pair. There's no community, there's no presence, it actually doesn't even exist at all, but it's going to be the future. Let's try and make this happen. And so that was kind of more or less a silly way of describing the journey here. And now it's been 2 years and a little bit, and yeah, here we are.
Thanks, Jay. That's a really good story. And AirSwap was great. AirSwap was the hottest thing since sliced bread back in the day. So that was a good time. Jay, maybe not everyone here is really familiar with the Avalanche Layer 1 network. It'd be helpful maybe to give us a little primer on what it is, how it compares to other Layer 1s, and why people here should know about it.
Yeah, so I feel like if we're going to get more, I can give like two different versions of this. There's the more technical side, which I think is pretty important for especially a group like this, but I can also kind of go more on the consumer side. But on the technical side, you have speed, transaction costs, and decentralization or security is kind of how I like to loop the two together. Decentralization is such a tricky buzzword because it means everything but also means nothing at the same time. For people, like for me, I think decentralization is thousands of people, perhaps. Some people think it's less, some people think it's more. And so with Avalanche, what you can do is you can build smart contracts that can scale to today's demands or the future demands as well. Think about processing power. Think about any technology that you interface with on a day-to-day basis. All of these things have capacity limits, and usually these industries push the envelope by making it more performant, cost-effective, and easy to use. I think UX is also a really important part. So what we've been focusing on Avalanche is it's hopefully, and I think it is, easy to build on. And we lean into the Ethereum virtual machine, which is the innovation that the Ethereum community came up with to basically run these smart contracts in a distributed and efficient way. That's kind of the simple way to put it. You also have this really robust developer community. So you don't want to really reinvent the wheel. And so I think a lot of the successes that Avalanche has had in the past 2 years is simply because we lean into a programming language, Solidity in this case, that was fairly popular instead of really trying to create our own language. Also, I think the main driver of all of this is really the applications in itself. And so I don't know how many, or actually maybe we can take a poll. Like, how many people have actually used applications in Web3 here? If you raise hands. All right, so pretty good amount actually. And how many of you think it's the best it can be now? Yeah, so no one, I hope. And I'm sure everyone's done all the different things that you have to do to get to the point you are now, whether that's learning how cold storage wallets work, whether you need to figure out how to connect to an application, making sure it's not a fraudulent application, all these things, right? And so I think that's where we still need to figure out the gaps. But anyways, the technical kind of summary here is Avalanche can scale, and we can tap into that a little bit later. I think the more consumer-friendly explanation is you have applications in a financial system or any other system where you as the user have full control. The value goes to you. There's no fee takers in between, such as a bank, such as clearinghouses, all these different major institutions that currently take fees. And so by a philosophical thought or kind of a perspective, it should be better for all of us as human beings, because what we have here is now this innovation called blockchain, which allows us to not have to trust each other as human beings, which I think is still fundamentally true, and is why even in this market, in this kind of downturn collectively, personally, I know I have kind of thoughts going back and forth on, only human, but the fundamental value proposition that this technology has to give is why I think I'm super excited still. I'm sure you guys are still excited and curious to figure out what's next. Maybe it's an implementation of NFTs in some different fashion. Maybe it's an implementation of some of DeFi in a different form. So I really do think the most recent thought I've had is we're really laying down the groundwork and seeing what can happen after that.
Well said. Now, Jay, us on the outside, we just see what new things and advancements come from Avalanche. But if there is anything that you can share, what are some new advancements that we can expect from Avalanche, maybe in the short or long term, that you think people here would find exciting?
Yeah, so I think the coolest part about Avalanche, all those value propositions are, I think, fairly interesting. But I think the coolest part is instant transaction settlement times. That means a transaction can go onto the platform and be verified or not, and then it can be settled on the blockchain and true for the rest of eternity, effectively. What's important about this idea is in traditional markets or traditional finance, you hear about this terminology like T+2 settlement. That effectively means it takes 2 days for transaction to settle. So if you compare 2 days to 1 second, it's not even close, right? But there's also kind of cons on that situation. There's also the permanence of that is something that we have to really take into consideration. Does it make sense for human beings like all of us to basically manage our entire net worth with basically one ledger, for example? Right now, I think the benefits of intermediaries, for example, is actually that if you make a mistake, those intermediaries can go back and try and rectify it. I'm sure there's plenty of people here that have accidentally sent a Venmo transaction to the wrong person or a bank wire to the wrong person. The bank can go in and actually transfer that back. On blockchain, because of the way we've set it up currently, it's not quite like that, but I think we can get there. So the settlement times is really interesting. And I think what we'll see is, to this date, before Avalanche's existence, there weren't any blockchains that could handle that type of performance. And so we're still seeing some of these new innovations come through and really take advantage of that value proposition. So I actually would recommend keep your eyes on some of the older sectors. DeFi, I mean, it's not even that old, but DeFi, there are some enterprise deployments. There are like anything but NFTs, basically, because NFTs are pretty new in the public eye. Take a look at those and see, all right, well, what are things that worked in slower chains, for example, but what are things that couldn't exist simply because the gas fees were so prohibitively high and because the transaction speeds were so slow? So one good example would be something like real-time payments of your salary. Well, imagine if instead of waiting every 2 twice a month, you could get your salary in real time. A lot of us, I think we live, or I don't know, I think we're mostly based in New York, so we're probably in a more privileged group of folks relative to the world, but some people really rely on that heavily. Imagine what that could do if you could get your payments on time and you no longer had to go out to take a loan to pay your rent, for example. So that's kind of the one thing that I like to kind of set it to reality a little bit. I think to your point of what I'm excited for coming up, I guess one example would be there's a partnership we have with this company called Open. Open's co-founded by a friend of ours of the Avalanche Labs team, Jason Ma. He's the founder of the music label 88 Rising, so comes from a music background. What he said was he was looking at the NFT explosion and he saw collectibles, but he was saying, all right, well, collectibles are cool and all, but what else is out there? And he saw a huge influx of people from his Hollywood days, from his music background, saying, hey, I want to get into NFTs, but I don't want to do collectibles, because collectibles is just adding to the noise, and unless you're like a really, really prominent person with a massive fan base, it's really hard to have sustained growth with collectibles, right? People are just going to speculate on it, and it's not going to go anywhere. So instead, he thought of this idea where he could say, let's use these NFTs as membership passes for these artists. So let's say you have like a Justin Bieber. Justin Bieber could then mint 100 passes, and these passes could be tied to real-world activities. Maybe it's like an exclusive backstage pass for a Justin Bieber concert once a year, for example, right? And let's say, just to keep the numbers simple, you pay 10 grand for that ticket. Now, let's say you invest in that 10 grand ticket, and I gave this example earlier today too, but if you give if you sell the Justin Bieber ticket for $10,000 when he was a YouTube star, and it's publicly traded and all the way up to today, that $10,000 pass is likely worth much, much more than that. And so now you have a way for fans to become super fans and really have a vested interest in that artist. And so what Jason calls this is he's saying it's kind of like every single artist or creator can be Willy Wonka, and you basically have golden tickets that you can sell. So that's like one idea that I'm super excited about. It's starting to launch. So the platform's actually already launched. They're just trying to figure out which artists want to do certain activations. One of the most recent artists that committed to a project on Open was Grimes. Grimes is making a children's book, and I actually don't know the economics of that, but she is interested, and that's, I think, just the tip of the iceberg. So that's one example.
And I appreciate you sharing that one, because at Chainlink, I work on the enterprise side, and we work a lot with your team on a lot of these things. So it's been really exciting to be working with you guys, because you guys are definitely thinking about these things in a much more, real life, real time manner, but in a forward thinking way. But on that, let's say we have a lot of Link Marines here, and not necessarily people that are familiar with Avalanche. How does Chainlink and Avalanche actually work together, both in a basic format, and feel free to carry that into maybe some solutions that we share together?
Yeah, so I think think of Avalanche as just the base layer. You have to have integrations into it in order for other apps that want to build on top of Avalanche to benefit from it. It's not like it's kind of like APIs right now. You have to have, if you wanted certain functions that another tool has, you need to open your APIs and make sure that they have connectivity. Chainlink and Avalanche both sit at the base layer effectively. Chainlink is able to bring real-world price feeds or real-world data on-chain. That's really important, because if you have just a blockchain without real-world data, then it's not really interacting with things in the real world. That's kind of the most simple way to put it. And so I actually think Chainlink was the first integration that we set out to go after, because it was so important for all these different applications.
Yeah, exactly.
And these applications, especially trading applications, need these price feeds, especially to price their pools, liquidity pools, or price certain functions that they have. And so this was like 2 years ago, but there was a ton of different applications which told our team, saying, we can't move any further to deployment unless we have oracles that Chainlink provides. And so that's kind of the crux of it, really, at the base layer. I think what's happening now is, from your guys' team too, you guys are trying to push the boundaries of what that looks like beyond just price or real-world data on-chain. There might be other ways to integrate interesting data on-chain, and I think that's what some of the, what I call the blockchain infrastructure, what's it called, industry, I guess, is trying to push after, because the more and more these products get complex, the more you need solutions, and rarely are the solutions that first come out are the right ones. It usually takes a little bit of iteration.
Well said. I appreciate that. Thank you. I want to pivot a little bit towards community. I think both of us, we care a lot about community. It's a big focus. How does Ava Labs think of community? What's your guys' take on it? And then how does that come back and support some of the work that you guys do?
Yeah, I think community is one of the most abused words in our space. I think it's almost a meme. Everyone talks about community, community, community. I think for us, it's really understanding who our customer is, very traditional marketing strategy. But with Web3, I think what's interesting is you have almost this ethos that empowers users, all of us, to want more from the brand. I've never seen any other brand, traditional brand, have this kind of almost religious type user base, including myself, including all of us, right? And so the analogy I always bring to the table when it comes to Web3 community is imagine if you're a startup and you're treated like a publicly traded company. That's how crypto is dealt. And so with community, the reason why it's super, super important to really understand your community is because not only are they global, but they're also going to be super demanding because of the transparency that blockchain offers as a technology, the ethos of it also being very kind of egalitarian and kind of like screw the big man type ethos, I guess, is kind of what's lingering, it seems. Bitcoin emerged out of the housing crisis or right after it, and so it does have really important historical ties to a lot of people. And I think the way we really learn about these community members is actually talking to people. That's why I think our team really cares about in-person events. I think the challenge, though, on the flip side is we can't be at every single event. And so I think it's really about educating people, making sure that people truly understand the complexity of it all, but also the simplicity of it all. Is there a way you can tell this story in a way that makes sense for the end user? If someone asked me what is blockchain, this room I would tell you guys in probably a more technical way. If my grandmother asked, I would not do it that way at all. I would do it a completely other way. And so from a marketer's perspective, I usually tell people, I feel like I'm a professional storyteller. How can I tell stories in which it resonates with you the most? And so hopefully you can tell that same story to other people. And then hopefully that kind of domino effect happens. Sometimes I tell terrible stories, and so it's not going to be always a win. But if we keep going at this, and I think if we all have our focus on actual utility and hopefully minimizing speculation where possible, I think we're going to be in a good place despite market conditions.
Perfect. Now, pivoting into more of a, let's say, like a technical view of it. I was at your Ava Summit in Barcelona where we learned about subnets. It was like it was a big deal. It was a really big deal. What is subnets? Maybe we could break it down for everyone, and then feel free to carry that into how people kind of, think about subnets long term as well.
Okay, so full disclosure, I wrote this in a tweet thread like a week ago, and I got totally roasted, but I still think it's a really good analogy. So
don't hold back.
Yeah, if you guys want to talk to me after and you're like, hey, you could tell the story a little bit better, like please do. I'm actually interested. And I did change it today too, so maybe this is V2. But what subnets is doing is you have everyone's coming to this industry saying, hey, everybody, I have a blockchain. Bitcoin, Ethereum, everyone else that you guys know said, I have this blockchain, everyone should build on it. What's happening is this world is massive and there's a ton of demand, and also you have bots now, right? You've always had bots, but bots also complicate things because they can compute things faster than anyone of us could do manually. And so you have this incredible load on this blockchain, and the way I compare this is think about a web page, something that everybody knows. Think about if websites in Web 2 or traditional internet decided to scale the internet by focusing on one domain or one web page, like a google.com, for example. That's what everybody in the industry is doing. Everyone's saying, hey, everybody, I'm google.com. This is where the internet should live. And so all you need to do is if you wanted to ride share, you have to go to google.com/Uber. And if you wanted to do Amazon, you have to go to /Amazon. And then if you wanted to use Whole Foods, you do google.com /Amazon /Whole Foods. So you can kind of see where this analogy is going. It's basically building pages upon pages. That experience would be absolutely terrible. The website would likely go down 1,000,000 times, and the internet wouldn't exist as it does today. Instead, the internet chose to pick specific domains, or IP addresses rather. And these IP addresses make it so you can actually have customizability from the ground up, more or less, where you could pick a domain and say, I want to be yahoo.com, I want to be amazon.com, and really not compete with resources. Now, again, this isn't the most perfect analogy, as some of the people on Twitter would tell me, but I think it's really helpful to understand how subnets work. So now pick Avalanche. The last year or so, we've basically gone through the motions of focusing on the google.com model to really just figure out if this actually works, just one web page or one platform. What subnets is going to be able to do is you can be a game, you can be an institution, you can be any entrepreneur, and actually create your own customizable network that also has interoperability to the main network. So it's kind of like a web of networks. So you no longer have to compete with other applications on that one page or that one blockchain, but instead you have your own blockchain. And I think where this is really important is, imagine a game. Games are a really good example for subnets. If you deploy a game on any major chain right now, you have to pay transaction fees to play that game. Some games, actually most games probably, do not benefit from transaction-based gaming. Imagine if you were to play, I don't know, like chess, for example, pick a game that everybody knows, and every single move you had to pay a transaction fee. No one would ever play that game. It would be the worst game in the world unless you were making money, and those people would be having fun, but that wouldn't be that many people, right? And so instead, subnets can help you customize the whole base layer. So with the game example, you can choose not to have fees. Maybe you don't want to have fees in your blockchain. Maybe you want to have fees that are native to your game. So if you have like a chess.com game, maybe it's just chess.com credits, and you can just minimize it to like cents where it doesn't matter, or something where it's not like a prohibitively high cost. And so I think the opportunities are really vast here. It's really early innings because subnets basically launched this a few months ago, to be honest. And I think we're still iterating on the user experience because it's still a little bit clunky. But hopefully, as we continue to iterate on that, you'll see a lot more different applications deploy on subnets, and hopefully longer term also bigger institutions, because I think that's where really the fun starts, because that's where a lot of the activity is.
Twitter can be mean, man. I thought that was a great explanation.
Yeah, Twitter's really mean.
Twitter can be mean. All right, to maybe like a last question, kind of a more like current event question. We've been talking about it. You and I have been in space for a while, so we've seen the market. You know, we're used to bear markets. It's kind of just like another day sometimes. But for folks that are new to it, new to the space, what are some things that, what are some tips? What are some things that you should be aware of? Maybe some motivational things to, just how people should think about the space and bear markets altogether.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm the best motivational speaker. You can do it. But I think the thing that I've done in the past, bear or bull market, is look at the metrics. Really look at what's happening under the hood. Numbers of transactions, how many users are using it, how many users are coming back. If you are always fixing on token price, you'll always have emotional attachment to that. So if it's up, you're going to be gleeful and enthusiastic. If it's down, you're going to be super sad. It's not necessarily the best way to live life, right? It's a little bit sad. So I think during the bear market, you're going to see metrics be really important. It's not going to be as lavish and friendly to kind of like the VC check writers as it has been the last 2 years or so. But I think you're going to see the true applications that really shine are the ones that are going to be able to get growth without the need for a frenzied market, for example. And so I think it's really time to look at what's real and what's not, and I think it takes a little bit of iteration to understand what that is. And even myself, I've been doing this for a while. I don't think I've had this formula perfected by any means. I think it's a world of kind of continuous learning. And I think maybe the other thing is just like, don't get too caught up in one thing. This space is so big. Think about the internet. Could you absolutely fathom 20 years ago that Uber would exist? Probably not. Could you fathom that Amazon would do more than deliver books? Probably not. And so I think that's where open-mindedness goes a long way. And as long as we're able to meet people, everyone here. I think we get caught up in technology. It's a human problem, and so just kind of have fun with meeting people. It's incredible that there's a self-selecting group that really wants to be here. No one forced you guys to be here, I think, right? So that's really cool, and the energy has always been there, and I think it's consistently grown. I tend to look back, and when I started going to crypto events in like I think it was like 2015 or 14, it was like a tiny boardroom, and it was all dudes. So the diversity has obviously improved, and not by much, but is getting there. So I think that's kind of the silver lining.
You know, for someone who says not a motivational speaker, that was pretty good. Hey, everyone, let's give a round of applause for Jay here. Thanks so much. We can open up for questions, if anyone has any questions. Yeah.
So what do you mind about ZK rollups? Like, how would that empower the layer 1 and subnets? If ZK rollups and ZK stars, I think they are right now in testnet, and if they are moving to the main chain, how would that, will their scalability increase, or how would that move on?
So the question was about ZK rollups. ZK means zero knowledge. Basically, the simple way to put this is you can basically prove something without giving up the contents of that information. That's like the bare way to describe what ZKs are. ZK rollups is a really interesting solution that a lot of different layer 2s, they're like scaling solutions that exist on Ethereum, have come up with to try and figure out how to mitigate the scalability problem. I actually don't know about ZK rollups on Avalanche, to be honest. So I don't know how that's going to play a part in it, to be honest. But I think ZKs in general are fascinating. Like, think about enterprises. Enterprises want to be a part of a bigger market, but they simply don't have the incentive to lift their walled gardens up. They're not going to be like, I don't know, like Salesforce isn't going to be like, hey, everybody, look at what we do in these databases. That's really would kill their whole business model. And so I think what's interesting is there are thoughts in where you can actually have these private marketplaces or private databases or private blockchains interact publicly with ZKs, because you could prove 1 or 0 without lifting up the content. I actually was talking about this with someone yesterday. I was like, I need to look into this way more, because it's just one of the rabbit holes that I haven't dug too deep into. I'm generally super excited about it. I know Starkware is a really good brand that's been working on that a lot, and there's a few other kind of like really savvy engineers. Yeah, I just need to see it in person to really understand it as a non-technical person.
Yep.
What types of advances do you see in developer tools or like blockchain development? Because like a lot of times, like what's possible is restricted by what people can actually build. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think the progress of developer tools is really a huge component of it is the developer community. So that was kind of what I was mentioning with leading into a little bit of the Solidity stuff or the EVM, for example. Community is super, super important. I actually learned a lot about developer communities not through myself participating, but by talking to my friends. I would always ask people, why did you choose Ethereum, or why did you choose Avalanche, or why did you choose Cosmos? It's usually the first reason is because there's a lot of resources to help us out. Now, what's amazing about this Web3 community is a lot of people are trying to lift each other up, and there are a lot of different tools. It happens in Web2 development, I guess, but you have a lot of different people creating tools to make their workflows easier. A really good friend of mine from my previous company, and this is kind of what really opened my eyes, was he had a problem, and he was just tinkering away at it. And he was like, I wish someone created this testing tool that could prove these bugs really easily, but no one's made them. And what he did was he just made it himself. And it's actually one of the most used testing tools in the Ethereum space, I think, in this time. That is top 10 or something like that. And it's been like 3-4 years in flight. So I think it's not perfectly answering your question, but I think you're going to see all these different tools continue to take shape and evolve, so long as there's demand for it in that ecosystem. So it's really contingent on the people that are driving it. I think there's a lot of pressure on security. That's a really big component. Testing, deployment, and then I think a lot of the stuff that Chainlink does too. It's really like, how do these tools work in tandem with a layer 1 or dApps, for example?
Yes.
Does the leadership talk about the mission and the values of Avalanche
Does the leadership talk about it? Just in general? Yeah. So I mean, one of our goals, at least from Ava Labs, is to digitize all the world's assets and to have a marketplace to efficiently transact with those things. And so I think the best way to kind of break that down is blockchain is able to remove the intermediaries, and it's also able to make value transfer more efficient. So imagine if there's assets that you could freely trade in an open market. For example, real estate in a closed vertical in real estate. You have private placement deals that are totally left only for the elite because you have regulations that you have to go through, like accreditation, for example. And so I think it's really just taking those silos down. And if you have market efficiency across channels, then it just kind of economics 101, I guess. More participants just means more efficient marketplace, and you have more utility for more people. An example, I was just talking about this before coming up here. Imagine if you could freely trade your clothes, for example. Like imagine if you had an NFT in your tag, and it only works in like high fashion, the example, but I think it could work in mass markets too, but it kind of has to start niche. So if you're a collector of a hoodie, and you had 1 out of 500 hoodies, for example, and you could NFT each one, you could actually totally remove the counterfeit market. But what you can also do with the point that I'm trying to make is you can now have that digital NFT that's physically tied to your asset, and you can actually now trade that or use that, and it has utility beyond it keeping you warm, effectively. And so imagine if you could take out a loan because you had 5 pieces of clothing that added up to $10,000 in value, and you can collateralize your loan, and maybe you wanted to take out like $15,000 in cash. And so it's kind of these like little things that I think I see from breaking these silos down, and that's our first goal. I think the vision changes as we start maturing towards it a little bit, but that's kind of the far out mission. With Avalanche specifically, it's really just about creating applications or enabling the creation of applications that truly provide value for the end user. I know that's super broad, and I think it's just me being a little safe, honestly, but you're seeing that in DeFi, for example. If any of you guys use DeFi applications, it's kind of crazy that you can actually be your own bank. Also scary, but kind of crazy. And you can actually earn fees from being your own bank. And no longer do you have to rely on a JP Morgan or a Citibank where they take the fees, and by the time all of the value accrues to you, you have basically the 0.1% interest that we all get.
Yeah.
Hi, Jay. So when you're storytelling to financial institutions about blockchain, have you ever heard that though they might be interested, they also have hesitations to explore because they're under the heavy hand of government? And if yes, are you also storytelling to bureaucrats and legislators to cut these institutions more slack to experiment?
Yeah, I think I agree with everything up to the point where it's the cutting slack part. Like, I think I get what you're saying. It's really just about understanding. This stuff is so complex. It really is. Like, it could not be more complex. I even get overwhelmed, like even today. So it's really just about like common understanding, but also in that storytelling exercise, I also need to know what they're thinking. I don't know what regulators are thinking when it comes to this technology. I see it on the news sometimes, but what are they actually thinking when they're off camera? Similar to financial institutions, when they're not in front of their investors or in front of their bosses, what are they actually thinking? And then from there, you can triangulate like, oh, well, maybe with finance people, the T+2 example resonates really well. Or maybe some of the headaches that they're facing. Like, what's the thing that is giving them the most frustration? And hopefully blockchain is that solution, is kind of the hero in that story. Similarly to regulators, regulators are always trying to constantly squash the innovation in blockchain, I think a lot. But I think they do so because they're afraid of it, but don't truly understand it. And sometimes you're talking about, I don't know, one of the biggest narratives that comes to mind that regulators always talk about is illicit use of this technology. Well, if you know anything about blockchain, it's the worst thing to actually do illicit activity because everything is on chain. And so it's pseudonymous, it's not anonymous. At least most chains, privacy chains are anonymous, I would say, probably. But when it comes to the regulators, I think that was such a aha moment for me with that storytelling. They were talking about, all right, well, what about terrorist funds? Like, how would they use it? It's like, well, if you have funds on a blockchain, you eventually have to convert that to your local currency probably to use it, right? Like, you're not, most people, like, I don't know, this is maybe a bad joke, but military, I guess, like, entities aren't buying missiles with AVAX token or Link token, I think. And if they are, then that's an interesting use case, I guess, but I don't think they are. And so what they have to do is they have to transfer from Link to then USD or whatever the local currency that they're using, and that conversion usually has a checkpoint because most of these centralized exchanges are regulated. And so it's really hard to offload that money. And so when you tell them that example of seeing it on chain, it's like, well, what happens if you have a terrorist group, a known terrorist group or illicit group, and you happen to know their wallet and they don't know it, and they're moving the money around? You could literally watch the whole thing unfold, and you can figure out exactly what's happening. And I think that's really fascinating. Like, another more, I guess, down-to-earth example, because I think most of us are in the military, but is like insider trading in Web3. There's plenty of stories where someone, usually an employee of a company, NFTs is a good example because it's happened in NFTs recently, would front-run mints or go ahead of the mint release and basically mint their own tokens before anyone knew, and then would profit because they had access to it early, and they would sell it to the open market after the fact, after it launched, right? Well, what happens to these people, I'm sure there are other people that haven't been caught, but the ones that I know of have gotten caught from Twitter people. They literally looked at the analytics and they said, wait a minute, the mint happened May 1st noon, but this wallet had minted it at May, or whatever, like April 30th, like midnight or something. And so these proof points are kind of bubbling up, and I think that's kind of like, first of many steps. But we do actually, I think the more serious note is we do actually have to talk more as a collective unit to these people, talk to them about it over drinks, dinner, really casually. I honestly was too young to know how the early internet started, but I think the funniest video I watched that is from the internet era is, if you guys go home and look it up, there's a Today Show segment where Katie Couric and I think it's like Lester Holt or something. They look really young, and it's like in the early or late 90s or something. And the internet came out, and they were like, what is the internet? What is it? And then they had to like mic their producer, and they're like, tell us what it is. And they're like, what is this www dot? And what is this weird A, the @ symbol? What is the weird A symbol? That, I feel like, is what I'm doing right now with all the questions a little bit, and hopefully eventually we'll get to a point where you're like, yeah, j@avalabs.org or something. Like, so anyways, that was kind of the long-winded answer.
Yeah.
Okay, so, appreciate being here, by the way. So pretty much what I want to say is I definitely appreciate Avalanche for being a product that's been released, and I've seen your ads on the train commuting. So that only begs the question, like, I come from uptown, Washington Heights, and I'm a developer, but not a lot of people are like me in my neighborhood, like as developers. So my question to you is, has Avalanche ever considered starting local community incubation zones so that way communities like mine, underrepresented communities, actually receive funding, whether it doesn't have to be through fiat but through crypto, to actually kind of kickstart that crypto revolution? Because you have to start off locally. You have to start off with everyday businesses, people, kids, all of that stuff. And that's a mission I've always been wanting to do. So I'm trying to see kind of what a big chain like Avalanche wants to do in that regard.
Yeah, so that's like one of my favorite topics, honestly, because I'm super passionate about it personally. And I think, to use an example, Chainlink does an amazing job with community efforts. I've known this team for forever now. Adeline's a good friend of mine, funny enough. And the way you guys go out and localize these events, there's so many of these events, I see it on Twitter all the time. I actually can't believe it sometimes. But I think that's step one. And really trying to scale our efforts. We're only a 2-year-old company, and so I was the 20th employee. We're almost under 200 now. And that's a lot of growth, obviously, in the 2 years, but it's still not a lot for a global product that hopefully everyone can be using. So I think we're getting there, and we want to make sure we have satellites, kind of like how you guys at Chainlink have done it, where you have local representatives who really know this product and are really passionate about it. Because those are the ones that will evangelize this just as I am. And hopefully that's kind of like the hub and spoke model that we're seeking for. Now on the other side of underrepresented and just general diversity commentary, one thing that I can definitely speak confidently on is I know Social also, we both are part of the same event squad, especially with the Barcelona Summit that you mentioned. One of the things, I know I joked about it earlier, but it is a serious topic, is diversity in the space is not necessarily the greatest. And that's not something that I take super lightly, and it's really like kind of finance 2.0 sometimes. And it makes sense, right? It's the most obvious area for finance to come into, and so just a natural evolution, and those people are the ones that find out first. Also, crypto is a highly risky industry still, and so usually people who don't have the means to be able to take risks are the ones that are underrepresented just from a historical perspective. And so I think it's up to people like us, people with the power, especially employees of such a big company, to make a concerted effort to give people those opportunities. So with the Avalanche Summit, for example, we partnered with this organization called HerdOw. It's an organization that creates a safe, livable space during the event for only women. So that was kind of like one step, right? And so we actually have a partnership, ongoing partnership with them to make sure that we always have their presence and also their feedback. Maybe we're assuming too many things and that we don't know about because we're simply not a part of that community. And they have to say, hey, by the way, we have these pain points and we want to solve these, something like that. So just open dialogue. Similarly, from a more kind of close to home example, at Avalanche Summit, and if you guys have gone to conferences in general, it's, again, like 99% men. But with Avalanche Summit, what we were to achieve was the speakers, which a lot of the people who don't care about this will usually book the same guys, and it's going to be, like, again, the speaker sets will also be 99 guys, 99% men. But what we were able to accomplish, which was amazing at the summit, was we were able to get 49% women as speakers for the event itself. And so that was, like, again, one tiny, tiny step amongst many. And so hopefully, one hypothesis, right, is if you have more powerful women on stage, they're going to bring their friends to support them. They're also going to attract more women to come out because it's going to be a much more inclusive experience. And so that model can be sliced and diced into all different sectors, whether that's socioeconomic diversity, ethnic diversity, or gender diversity, or whatever it may be. So I think we're getting there, and I hope that if we continue talking about it more openly and actually showing that we're doing it and not just like putting a Twitter post and doing the corporate BS that some people do, then it'll hopefully turn over soon, and maybe at one point in the future we'll be able to have something up in Harlem and something that just comes out organically without any of our help, and that would be like an amazing win.
Yeah, over there.
Hi, really excited to be here. Thank you, Chainlink. I have a question regarding traditional marketing. Actually, I'm new to this space. I started learning about Chainlink when I heard about AP, like Associated Press. Similarly, with Crypto.com, there's UFC. With Tezos, there's Formula One. With FTX, there's Miami. So I'm curious, is there anything in the pipeline for like Avalanche to be partnering in the future with an organization or company? Like, for example, I saw a video with MasterCard recently, and that sort of like just opens my eyes, and I think to the public too, it's like, wow, this is interesting. So I'm curious about your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so we have one major brand activation we have is with Formula E. It's the electric Formula One, basically, is the best way to put it. The reason why we reached out to those guys is because, or Andretti is the team that we reached out to, is because environmental friendliness is also a really hot topic in the space. Proof of stake chains, Avalanche, other proof of stake chains are much more eco-friendly than proof of work, for example, which is what Bitcoin uses to as a consensus mechanism, or a means to which to secure it, I guess is a better way to say it, not a mechanism. So that was a brand partnership because it was able to get more eyes to the Avalanche brand at the top of the funnel is what you would call it, right? And you want to go all the way down. And you guys are probably at the bottom because you guys know a lot about crypto, are here, have used apps clearly with the votes that we had earlier. And so that's what Tezos, Crypto.com, all those guys are doing. They're basically trying to see what sticks at the wall, and they're saying, hey, Crypto.com, maybe if we show it enough, they'll take a look, and they'll look and to see if, like, maybe I want to buy Bitcoin. Oh, I think I know one exchange, it's Crypto.com. And so that's on the marketing side, and we have other deals in the works that I can't say publicly, but we do have them. And then the other program that we're trying to work on is this ambassador program. How can we partner with people in a meaningful way to really spread the brand? Not quite like an influencer, but a way where we can get involved. So like, I feel like an influencer by definition is you kind of just give them money and they just do like a commercial spot and they kind of just leave, right? That seems to be kind of what it is. But I think the way we're looking at this influencer model is how can we make it so they eventually will be so intertwined with the product that past the contractual obligations, they'll still be using products in Avalanche. And so ideas we had were teaming up with athletes, and if they could run a node, for example, and earn their contract by running a node, that's step one. Maybe they could be getting into investments. Maybe they could help with or participate in boot camps, for example. There's all these different ideas that we have, and we've executed on some of them, but not clearly enough. And so we're continuing there. I think on the other side with institutions and enterprises, there's so many. We have partnership. We're currently working with Deloitte. That's one that's public. Deloitte wants to secure grants on the blockchain and create basically a source of truth for disaster relief grants in the United States. And so if you run a node, or if, for those that don't know what a node is, you basically run a portion of the blockchain to process those transactions. If you have a state that runs a node, you can actually look at which grants are verified, and you no longer have to deal with the verification process that they're currently dealing with, where you go, all right, is this true? All right, let me talk to 10 accountants and 10 lawyers and see if it's verified, and it's a lot of headaches in terms of intermediaries. That's just one example. And I think the closing thought is really, it's just hard for enterprises to get in for a variety of reasons, but I think the simplest one is that they're huge. And so it just takes time. So I think we're getting there. Like the minute Deloitte came to Avalanche Labs, I was like, whoa, we feel like we've gone so far from early days when I was part of the agency, and we didn't get anyone close to that. We got like, IBM was interested in blockchain, but they basically were just advertising that they were interested in it, but they didn't really do it. And so I think just baby steps.
Well, one more question over there.
On behalf of decentralization maxis, what would happen to Avalanche if Avalanche went under?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, if Ava Labs went under, the people would still exist. So you could technically still maintain the blockchain, but the entity wouldn't exist in its own, and you wouldn't have the legal protection. But are you saying all the people that maintain it?
Well, they wouldn't get paid anymore, right?
Yeah, but you still would have like access to the code repo, so it wouldn't be, it's not like, this is like obviously super disaster situation. Eventually you don't want this point of failure where it's just Ava Labs basically maintaining most of the code. So
the point I was trying to get at is, does Ava Labs have that strategy in place?
Yeah, absolutely. There's going to be, every single company starts, I truly believe that it's easier to scale and move forward as a centralized entity. That's just how it's been done since the beginning of time of corporations. And especially with distributed systems, it's a little bit complex to really open the gates, because imagine if other people have ideas and they're able to basically make changes to the code, and it's not necessarily in strategy, then you're gonna just have all these different, it's kind of too many cooks problem. And so for us, we don't have like a strategy where it's like, okay, year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, but we have milestone-based strategy. So if we're able to accomplish 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way to whatever it may be, then we're gonna have, I don't know, potential ideas, and I'm not saying this is actually what it is, but we could be governance. Maybe the tokens enable you to vote, like shareholder votes. And so if there's improvements on the protocol, all of us, if we all held Avalanche tokens, we'd have to vote on it before it goes through. Something like that. Voting also isn't perfect in my personal view, and I'm sure some of you guys have those thoughts too, but yeah, we'll get there.
Thank you so much, Jay. Really appreciate you coming. Everyone's give a round of applause for Jay. Thanks so much.